Welcome. I'm Orion Breen.
And I'm Patrick Brady, and this is Maine
Maine
Better,
Better,
where we discuss community and connection for the Maine Better Transportation Association. With us today are Jacqueline Gelb and Paul Ruiz of the American Trucking Association. So we understand that on August, the Maine DEP is going to be holding a public hearing and inviting comment on Maine adopting the California's Clean Trucks rule. We'd love to hear a little bit from you guys about what your perspective on this is and sort of what the policy and the process is going to be.
The adoption of the advanced clean truck rule, we've seen it in multiple states now after California has finalized their rule. We're now even seeing it here in the federal government, as well as EPA is in active rulemaking, and it really is to drive towards electrification in the commercial vehicle industry. Maine's taken a look at this before this regulation. They took a pause with it. It's popped back up, and it is very much focused on trying to get as many electric trucks on the road in the state of Maine as quickly as possible. It is a regulation that is focused on class of vehicles. It has sales targets to the truck manufacturers, to make them be able to sell electric trucks so that they are able to then sell their diesel products and be in compliance. It's a tough regulation. It is very much focused on trying to hit that target of 100% electric vehicles in the state.
This is the trucking industry. The regulations in our space tend to be generally iterative. We are an interstate trucking industry. We have to be able to operate across all 50 states with common emission standards generally. But we're a very important industry. When it comes to the American supply chain, we move over 72% of our nation's freight. A common saying that we have in our industry is if you got it, a truck probably brought it. We are one of the largest employers and frequently the top employer in, I think, about 29 states, with about 8 million Americans having a commercial driver's license. And we employ a variety of drivers across a diverse number of applications, use cases. And so when we're talking about regulations, we're really trying to figure out what is the right way to right size the emissions reduction potential to the application and the appropriate use case for that application.
One thing that sort of immediately jumps out to me is a question on sort of the charging infrastructure, which I'd be interested to hear thoughts about. But also, I'm curious, where's the technology stand for electrifying these sort of heavy duty vehicles?
The technology is still really in the infancy stage for commercial vehicles. To Paul's point, commercial vehicles, it's a very diverse industry. It goes from really a kind of a class 3 all the way to class 8 truck. So it stems from, a small kind of delivery truck of what you imagine and expect from like your UPS and your Amazon delivering your package, to the package and delivery kind of like beverage trucks that you see running around in cities, all the way to your class 8 sleeper cabs. It is an industry that has a lot of different ways of how it moves goods, and it has different routes and different types of use for those trucks. So the technology, what we have found in our discussions, even with fleets and fleets who are looking to adopt this technology in our discussions with the OEMs, that it's definitely easier to electrify smaller than going up. So the smaller the vehicle, it's easier to kind of plan for and electrify that. But as you get into your class 8, you're putting your class 7, your class 8, really like strong, like work trucks or over the road highway trucks. Those trucks are really hard to solve for. There are other issues that you're having to manage. You're having to manage the weight on your truck, your payload is what we call it, of like how much, weight you're able to pull behind you, which is your revenue generator as a fleet, as a truck company. You're running into issues with your hours of service with your drivers. So being able to plan for the downtime of when that truck is not operating and it's charging. A truck not operating and running is a truck that's not making money. And it's also just making sure if it becomes like a packaging problem of where are you going to put the batteries? How are the batteries going to be stored on the actual like truck? So, it's at a stage of people are learning. We're still in the we call it at the ATA, we call it early demonstration phase, but these regulations that we see kind of coming out of California that are being discussed in other states are very much of wanting to push electrification in our industry as quickly and aggressively as possible.
And where a lot of that push comes from is, I think, this temptation that many people have to think about the heavy duty market as being the same as the light duty market, the passenger vehicle market. We have seen enormous recent uptake in electric vehicle sales. I think we just passed 4 million light duty electric vehicle sales in the United States cumulatively. That's an impressive milestone. And that uptake and that interest, it's tempting to see the two as being the same when they're not. The set of circumstances that a fleet is making are different than the kind of decisions that a consumer tends to make. A consumer's choice to buy an EV can be more of an emotional one. They're looking at their personal vehicle use. Whereas a fleet, frankly, if you can demonstrate that you're going to save money, total cost of ownership basis is what it's generally called, then it will make economic sense. And if you can install the infrastructure in a way that is not costly, and you can ensure that your vehicles have a charge and will be able to be used the next day, if you know that the maintenance is going to be slim, it will make sense for your operation. But when we're talking to fleets about electrification, what we're hearing consistently is that the technology is not yet ready, that there are still many improvements to be made, but that pace of change is just not happening fast enough for many fleets in several of the heavier duty applications to meet their maintenance and is particularly to their infrastructure and performance needs.
What do you recommend policymakers do to both address people's concerns as well as look forward to having smart policy in the future?
So there are a couple of things of what policymakers need to actually do before they really even look at this regulation. The first is that they need to make sure that they can take a look to see what's from the energy perspective for the state. So is the state in a position to be able to handle the increased energy demand and loads that electric trucks are going to demand? An electric truck is going to use a tremendous amount of energy to charge as opposed to a light duty car. Like I said earlier, a truck that is down, that's not running, is a truck that's not making money. Like that's costly to our industry. That's costly to that truck fleet. And that translates into higher prices and higher transportation costs if they have to account for that. So you would need to be able to have a charging infrastructure system that could charge quickly for a truck. Even for a medium duty kind of package and delivery truck or school bus that comes home every single night that would be able to have a longer downtime, you're still going to need to be able to have that load available to charge those trucks. So that's the first thing of what a policymaker needs to look at. The second thing that they need to look at, these trucks are very expensive compared to a conventional diesel product. They're 2 to 3 times more expensive for battery electric trucks. And what we've gotten from hydrogen fuel cell electric trucks, which also this regulation would allow to be able to qualify as a zero emission vehicle, those can be upwards of 7 times more. So we need to be looking at incentive programs that encourage the adoption, encourage early adopters to adopt this technology, because just as important as it is in our industry to have kind of those first time buyers for the trucks, you're also going to need to have a secondary owner market as well. So we need to start creating a used electric truck market here. And that is still very much at the early stages, because we really are in year like 1.5 to 2 years of having electric trucks on the road today. So we don't even really know what's going to be the residual value at this point of those early generation electric trucks. So being able to have incentive programs that encourage early adopters, that will turn over fleets to adopt ZEV technology, is going to be able to be kind of a proof positive point for a fleet to kind of put 1 to 5 to 10 electric trucks into their fleet to start understanding those learnings, building out the charging infrastructure. That's going to take a tremendous amount of money and investment, and being collaborative of thinking of that, you're not going to be able to leverage the charging infrastructure that's being built out for light duty trucks. Or if you do want to leverage that, you need design for a truck. Prime example is you can't pull in a heavy duty truck into the library parking lot to have it go and charge. There's not going to be enough power there, and the truck's not even going to fit. So you've got to design your charging infrastructure to allow trucks to kind of pull on through and to have enough power to keep them moving.
As Maine is looking at the ACT, there are a lot of incentives that should be considered to attach to that program. It is more than just the mandate. It is the package of the incentives and the coordinated build out of the infrastructure that needs an all of government at the state level approach to avoid what could be catastrophic for the supply chain if it's not managed in a coordinated, well thought program to incentivize the level of adoption that is in California's program. Remember that you're adopting essentially the California program. You're adopting the entire model, the regulatory approach, the sales mandates. But with that, also the California incentives that California has implemented, the HFIP program, the incentives that they have on the charging side. The state has made enormous investments in order to keep up with the scale of adoption that they are requiring. We want to see that in other states where this commitment is being made. If you're going to commit to a mandate, you have to fund it. And if it's not funded, then that would be very problematic. One temptation is to look at sort of at the federal level, the incentives that are contained in the bipartisan infrastructure law, or the Inflation Reduction Act. The $40,000 commercial vehicle credit is one that often comes up. Important to note that that credit, $40,000 is really just it's a drop in the bucket. It covers 12% of the federal excise tax that you're going to pay for your truck. That's not a whole lot on a vehicle that's 2 to 3 times more expensive. And so what's really being made is a bet that the prices are going to come down at the level that are required in the law in order to achieve your adoption targets. And for that to happen, a lot of things need to align. And you really have to make a huge push at the state level for that alignment to occur.
I mean, one of the comments that Maine businesses made 2 years ago when this was brought up is that, California has these subsidies for helping people buy these vehicles and use these vehicles and make this transition. So if you pass a stick approach, but you leave out the carrots, if you are a Maine business and you want to get an electric 18-wheeler today, you're going to have a hard time. And in the future, are they going to be making these at the level that they're both going to be able to meet a state like California's demands for 18-wheelers and Maine's demand for 18-wheelers? And if you basically have California doing subsidies, the limited supply is going to go towards the West Coast, and on the East Coast, if we don't match those subsidies for a limited supply of these vehicles, potentially, then even if we pass this mandate, how are we going to possibly fulfill it?
Yeah, I mean, let's take an example, right? In Maine, you have a very large logging industry, right? You have an entire area of your state to the north that is mostly remote, mostly wilderness. There's not a lot of infrastructure up there, electricity infrastructure, charging infrastructure. For a lot of those operators, they're looking for, because they're heavy loads, they're going to be looking for a long range, and they're going to need to have a vehicle that can perform on an off-road capability. And it's a challenging use case, right? To require those types of operations to electrify. And unfortunately, the way the California rule is written, there isn't a way for Maine to structure the rule for its own state, for your own state. You can't tailor it for the purposes of industry in your state. You have to adopt or not. It's binary. It's either you do or you don't.
Yep.
And the problem with that is you have your own performances. You have your own topographical and geographical climatological needs up in Maine that are not the same as California. And you really have to think, is this practical? Will this do for an industry that employs tens of thousands of Mainers?
One thing for policymakers to think through here is EPA is working on their greenhouse gas 3 regulation right now. And their current proposal is that it would go into effect come model year 2027, and that it would have increases and assumptions on ZEV penetration rates. Now, we're in an active rulemaking right now with them on this, but in all kind of regulations that we have worked on in this space for the trucking environment is that national regulations deliver more emissions benefits than states going in alone on the California model. And so as Maine is looking at a 2027 implementation date for the California's Advanced Clean Trucks rule, EPA is also working on their proposed regulation that is driving towards electrification in the commercial vehicle industry. And with that, you would have kind of a 50-state solution. So, I think as policymakers are looking at this, is that California isn't the only option here for them to think about. The EPA is working, their regulatory agenda as well. And they have a much different kind of process and what they look for in the writing of their regulations. And what they have put forward is not as much of a one-size-fits-all California proposal of what California has finalized.
Yeah, Jacqueline's right. The federal program is developing, and we're going to see another phase of emissions reductions and new technologies. We have our thoughts on what those levels should be, but I don't think anybody at ATA or in industry doubts that electrification is coming in trucking. Look at our show floor. We have electric vehicles that are being demonstrated, right? The OEMs are offering them. It's the pace, and it's the question of, is the pace appropriate for the location? Is it appropriate for the context that we see it in? Everything you get at the store comes basically on a truck. And so we live in this time where everybody is very concerned about inflation. And it is worrying that if we put the cart before the horse, so to speak, we don't have the infrastructure we need, skyrocketing trucking costs, which already faces a lot of challenges with, staffing and other issues that you folks are trying to address through great education and other programs. But the cost of trucking goes up, it affects everybody in the state of Maine and everybody in this country.
Absolutely. I mean, we've even heard from fleets who have some of these trucks operating in their fleets today. It takes 2 electric trucks to move the same freight as 1 diesel truck. So I'll just let that kind of sit with you for a minute, because the amount, this is an industry that's highly efficient, right? Now changing your business operations, your route optimization. We have a driver shortage in the industry today. You now have to go and find another driver to sit in that truck. These regulations need to be developed thoughtfully. They need to be sequenced. Infrastructure has to come first. It is a key proof point for fleets to be able to adopt this technology. If we don't have it set up, and a fleet has to go and purchase an electric truck, it becomes a very expensive lawn ornament. That's not something that works for anyone in this country.
And it's not just the vehicle cost. Remember, with electric vehicles, it's also the electric vehicle supply equipment, the EVSE. And in the heavy duty space, what we're frequently talking about are the fast chargers. Fast chargers are very expensive. In our industry, that it can be $150,000 to $216,000 per port. And those are the EPA numbers for in the GHG3 proposal. That's a lot to ask a fleet to do. And then they have to plan long-term with their utility to make that kind of investment. It's a lot of energy pull that needs to happen from the grid. And delivering those upgrades in the infrastructure, the distribution, it is a lot of work and a lot of forethought and planning that needs to happen over a long time to even make a small investment in electrification possible.
Is there any kind of like parallel thinking being done on sort of road and bridge funding? Obviously as the fleets move electric, less fuel, less taxes, all that sort of stuff. Is there any kind of parallel thought being given to that issue that's coming down the road?
From the ATA perspective, we're pushing very hard to repeal the federal excise tax for the purchase of new trucks. So diesel trucks, this is a Class 8 truck, a Class 8 tax that is placed on a truck that's 12%. It's a discouragement to being able to purchase a new diesel truck, which are extremely clean and near zero today, or even a discouragement to be able to purchase an electric truck as well. So paying a 12% tax on a $400,000, electric truck, that's a pretty big price deterrent. But it's also about turning over the fleets. And it's about trying to get the newest and greatest, even diesel technology on the road today. We're talking about this from the federal side of trying to create a system that rewards the, turning over the fleet. That's going to have a bigger impact on emissions reduction. Nearly half of the trucks that are on the road today are pre-2010 trucks. So being able to turn over those trucks to get, 2023 diesel trucks in their hands, and they're only going to get cleaner as we get into 2024, which has a new emission standard for carbon reduction coming out. And then we get into 2027, which has new emission targets as well. We're only going to see environmental benefits from this. So there are things we can do here in the near term that can reduce emissions, as opposed to leapfrogging into technology that isn't ripe yet, that still needs to be developed to make sure that we get the range and the weight, and we get the use cases right for the industry.
Yeah, and to your question about infrastructure, the one complaint that we often hear in our industry, the top issue in our industry surveys often is truck parking, the unavailability of truck parking. And, interesting that, now at the federal level, the renewed attention is on electrification, particularly of public charging. We're going to have to do a lot of pre-planning and a lot of forethought in order to make that happen in a way that aligns with, federal hours of service rules, as an example, right? But also is placing the distribution and the networks that need and anticipate future freight demand and look at locations where there is freight. And a lot of that work is currently being looked at, but you look at the chronic shortage that we're facing and truck parking and all of the issues that entails. We have a lot of planning to do.
Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing your perspective with us today. I know that this is a big issue and you work on a lot of other big issues, so I hope we can have you back on soon to talk about the other important programs, projects, and policies you're working on.
Thanks for having us. We appreciate it.
It was a pleasure.